Utah's identity crisis. Will we adopt California's identity? And if we do not define our own identity for ourselves? That's the question on today's show. And in exploring this very big, broad question, I want to explore where we came from. I think that you really don't know where you're going unless you know where you came from. That's why I've always been a student of history. I love studying Mormon Pioneer history. That's by and large what this episode's going to be about. Some of the fascinating things that brought so many people out west traditionally. Why people came out west is a big question I want to answer. But the big question is, does Utah and the West still have an identity unique from the United States? I mean, we see blue states and red states, though, that we could say that's our identity. I don't buy that. I don't believe the political parties make up, by and large, our identities. But where are we standing up for who we are, what our ideals are, what our principles are? And if we don't, are we likely to become politically, culturally, and religiously just like California? So politics flows downstream of culture. And for decades, California has defined and created the culture of the West and a lot of the culture of the entire United States. California has been the epicenter for movies, music, products, agriculture, and technology. But this is not the case any longer. California is losing or has lost their way. As we've pointed out, major corporations and residents are leaving California in droves. It's impacting Utah in a major way. We are seeing a major housing boom where just real estate prices are getting out of control here. But so the question is, how do we prevent the Californication of Utah? And in this episode, I want to share with you the traditional Western ideals that have encompassed the unique history and identity of the Western expansion, and especially the Great Basin states. I believe we share a lot of our culture with Idaho, Nevada, Arizona. The Great Basin states are unique, and I feel like they do have their identity, and we need to define that identity so that we preserve it. In this episode, I want to get into my favorite topics: Mormon Pioneer history, as I said, Western history, the Gold Rush, the initial Western expansion, and what made the Wild West so attractive. It's a very difficult question to actually answer, because if you've ever visited the UK and you see this lush, beautiful, wonderful climate, easy to grow things, and you wonder what brought thousands and thousands and thousands of people to the Great Basin to help build this kingdom of Zion. Why did so many Mormon pioneers come out here? I think it's a very interesting question to ask, and it's a question I fundamentally have asked as a student of history for the last decade. I've been exploring that question, so it's going to be very fun to share with you what I found. But first, I want to tell you about Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef. They can be visited at cmrbeef.com. I've been working with this company for quite a while because they have simply the best grass-fed beef I've ever tasted. I've tasted a lot of grass-fed beef. They are not all created equally. A lot of grass-fed beef that's produced is, unfortunately, the cows are eating scrub, they're eating ragweed, they're eating thistle, they're eating whatever happens to be growing. And that is essentially kind of grass-fed beef, I suppose. But cows that eat thick, rich, lush, native Utah grasses, where there is a huge amount of grass for them to find and forage, it is seriously far superior. And what they do at Canyon Meadows is good for the earth. They do progressive grazing. They do what's called mow and move. They don't have their cows overgrazing, but they build soil and ecology, and they're able to actually make the soil more fertile every single year. What they do is good for the wildlife, of course, because they maintain a happy, healthy herd. And the product that they produce go look at studies. It has such a greater amount of nutritional density than the beef that you buy in the store. So not only does it taste far better, but it is far better for you. So a lot of people who might watch Joe Rogan think that the only way you can get really, really delicious, nutritious meat is going out and hunting deer or elk. This is the closest thing you can get. So I'd suggest you go out, either join their email list or check out their product page. Be sure to let them know that we sent you there. They've been getting a ton of business, but it's not all so simple to tell them that we sent you. Be sure to tell them that we sent you, please. So when you order your steaks, your ribeyes, your hanger steak, just at the bottom, there is a way you can tell them right here, promo code. Please use that. That would help us out a lot. So Western ideals and principles were once very simple and clear. Westerners want freedom from tyrannical power. It's just that simple. And if you really think about it, that is it. That is it. A freedom from tyranny. The Mormon pioneers were being attacked, they were being persecuted, they were being driven out of every place that they were going to. That is what brought Mormon pioneers out here. But if you look at the greater Western expansion, even the beginning of the United States, we just examine history and we find that governments worldwide almost always become tyrannical. Do you notice that? Government always wants to take more from hardworking people and make it more difficult for people to operate their businesses and practice their values, whether it's their religious values, whether it's how they want to raise their children, whether it's to be more self-sufficient. The government is always going to get in the way. And our founding fathers understood that. The government is like a beast. You have to keep it in a cage. If you let it get out, it's going to be nothing but tyrannical. But there's other forms of tyranny. Religion and corporations can also become tyrannical. And in many ways, I say this with all respect, the biggest religions, including the LDS Church, has become tyrannical in some manners. So has the Catholic Church. So has other churches. So has the Muslim faith. So it's nothing new. Big institutional powers always shift toward tyranny. And the only practical government, and this is what our founding fathers understood, the only practical form of government is limited government. And it's got to be limited by the people. Limited government is the cage that is put around the beast, and that cage has to be strong and it has to be intact. And so what I want to go into is how the West, as it's been moving west, farther and farther west. You used to say the West, and you meant the Ohio River Valley in the 1830s when the Mormon Church was founded. Then the West became West, any place west of the Mississippi. Then the West became the Great Basin area. Then the West is now Alaska. But the West is always a place where you'll find more freedom and less tyranny. And if you have a place that has fewer regulations, less taxes, less imposition on residents, you find a place that people want to move to, which is exactly why so many people from California are coming here now, because we've maintained that beast in the cage. We've kept the government in check. And it's why we're experiencing these mass migrations. So it's clear that governments want more of our money. They want more freedom. They want to exchange more of our religious and cultural values for their values. There's a vacuum. When you eliminate religion from the lives of so many people, the government in turn becomes a religion. Nietzsche saw that. That's why he said, what's going to happen in this century when God is dead? That statement, God is dead, was actually him fearful of what was going to happen when the state replaces the church. But I'm not going to get into that deep. I want to talk about now the migration of people here to the Great Basin, what was the building of the Great Basin Kingdom, something I've studied for a long time. But my ancestors, they came from England. They came from Scandinavian areas, and they came from Armenia. They all came here to escape tyranny. That's what they all had in common. But they were in much more hospitable climates. They had much more established economies. Why did they come out to the harsh desert, arid area of Utah to establish their lives? And I actually lived in the UK, and the UK is just so green. It's so storied. It has this amazing history. You go walk down the streets of, we've spent our time in Cambridge, and you see this massive King's College. It was built like 1,400 years ago. I came to a conclusion. In England, in the 1830s and 1840s, I mean, up until the turn of the century, really, and still exists today, you have a monarchy. In all the European countries, you had monarchies. They have dukes. They have earls. They have the landed gentry. They have the industrial factory owners. But there is a very clear distinction between the upper class and the lower class, the working class poor. That clear distinction, without there being much middle class, is what drove so many people out west. It's what, to have the promise of actually owning land. I mean, think about how that would be. You spend your life toiling as a farmer, working on somebody else's land, or you have this little house that's been in your family for generations, and you really can't own any more because you're not a duke. And family and land would be passed down from generation to generation to generation. That's how it operated in England. They were saying, come out here, we'll give you 20 acres, or we'll give you a plot of land. You can homestead the land. You could become a subsistence farmer. It was an amazing promise. And so my English ancestors, I was surprised to find out, they weren't poor. They wanted to be part of a new story, though. The old story is that it was just plugging away. The Industrial Revolution was certainly happening. But in terms of people being able to climb a socioeconomic ladder, that did not exist in Europe. So that's the primary reason why I believe they came here. And I think studying it through the lens of economics, I think is very effective. You'll hear all of the spiritual, religious reasons why people came. They obviously were converts. They believed in the Book of Mormon. They believed in Joseph Smith. But I want to know the economic reasons, because that really gets to the heart of it, because people, by and large, vote with their feet. They move where they want to go because they want to have the best possible life for themselves and their families. And so I want to share with you now what I believe is the bedrock of what we share as Westerners, whether we're liberals, conservatives, Latter-day Saints, Protestants, blacks, whites, Hispanics. I want to share with you the bedrock of what I believe is the reason why everyone lives here, and everybody who's recently migrated here. Perhaps you don't think that we have anything in common. And I believe the liberal leftist media wants us to believe that the color of our skin or our ethnicity, that defines who we are. No. We all can have similar common traits and ideals, no matter what the color of our skin is or what our ethnicity is. And that's the original vision of America. When my ancestors migrated from Armenia, they ditched that Armenian language right off the bat. They never taught their kids even how to speak it. There's nothing left of it because they were Americans. Not hyphenated Americans, they were Americans. I think you'll be surprised by what I found, what we all have in common. And so I want to go over some of the history of the Western United States, why people came here. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about green bikes. So I want to encourage you to go visit greenbikeslc.org. Green Bike is a healthy, affordable, and convenient way to get around Salt Lake City. So it's a partnership between Select Health, which is a big insurance company, and the UTA, which is our Utah Transit Authority, to get more cars off the road and more people onto bikes. I think it's an awesome idea. You can hop around on a bike to any one of their 30 stations. Look at these stations all over downtown. So you can ride tracks into downtown to the Salt Palace, and you could hop around bars and restaurants and support the local businesses. And you could go to a performance or just walk around. And the best thing is their annual pass program. For as low as $35, you can get an annual pass. This is for employees. For $45, you can get another annual pass, and they have a special discount going on designed for people who want to learn more about discounted passes. So go check them out, sign up for their newsletter, and learn more about green bikes. And check them out. They're awesome. So now I want to get into how the West was settled. I think it's very interesting. I don't think a lot of people know this proper history, that all of this giant tract of land was Mexican territory prior to 1848. And if you know a little bit about Mormon Pioneer history, it was 1847 when Mormon pioneers began settling out here. And the thing that I think is overlooked is that the Mormon pioneers saw an incredible opportunity here. What they saw the ability to do was to create a huge area of local independent communities. I want to share with you the Plat of Zion. It was this idea that was used over and over and over again to establish communities. And there were 500 communities like this that they established. We of course know that Salt Lake City center is the temple, and then west of the temple you have West Temple, and then you have all these plats, all the lots that were subdivided out, and then beyond that you have your agricultural lands, which have bigger acreage or bigger plats of land. And this was something that was common in Mormon pioneer development, because essentially the way I look at it, the Western expansion was driven by land speculation. Everybody knew that if they got this free land, eventually this land would acquire value, and they could give it to their kids, they could farm it, they could grow it, they could develop it. And the further and further out you went, the longer it would take for your land to acquire value. But a lot of what the early pioneers realized is that they can just get a lot of people out here. The real estate prices are going to go up, and they're going to be able to sell this land and make a lot of money. And that's really a big reason why the Mormon Church is one of the wealthiest churches it's the second wealthiest church in the world, because they've done a lot of land speculation. And so I've always just found this history very fascinating. My ancestor, who's the most famous, I have a lot of Mormon ancestors. He owned the land that was where Crossroads Mall was built. His name was Willard Richards, but it was right here. And Joseph Smith basically gave his first presidency all the land around the temple, and then kept going out. And then if you would come back out to the later successions of arriving immigrants from places in Europe, they'd all get land. It would just be further and further on the outskirts until they just filled this place full of people, and it was an amazing, bustling city. And I find it very fascinating. So this was not just in Utah. This was Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, and even California. And this is a good statement. This actually comes from the Mormon Church's website. Not all of the pioneering saints settled in the Salt Lake Valley. By 1900, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had founded more than 600 communities in a broad stretch extending from Canada into Mexico. In the words of Pulitzer Prize-winning author and historian Wallace Stegner, the Latter-day Saints were one of the principal forces of the settlement of the West. So really, a major story of the West, of course, was the way they built these 600 communities all over the place. And they were community builders in that they would go to Europe and they would not seek primarily the working class poor. They would seek the tradesmen. They first wanted mill workers. They wanted carpenters. They wanted skilled tradesmen like blacksmiths and coopers. And they wanted people who, for example, the mills that were built along the rivers initially in the Salt Lake Valley, we have about 8 canyons and 8 rivers. I think 4 of those rivers were put with mills right away, grist mills, where they could harness the power of the river and use it to turn a wheel, a big grist mill, and they could mill wheat into flour. So as you can see, Brigham Young and the Mormon Pioneers in the first presidency, they were incredibly good at recruiting the people who needed to come out to these places that had the essential trades to build communities. And so, for example, you can't build homes without somebody who knows how to mill lumber. So they would find people who could build sawmills. You can't build a home without having nails. So they would recruit people who would be blacksmiths. And these 600 communities that they built, they knew exactly what people would fulfill which roles. And I think that's kind of what we've lost in our modern society. And I think this is where I go into an idea we could all agree on, is that people need to have an essential sense of belonging in a place. And if we all are working for tech companies and we're all online all the time and we don't have an essential function, then we lose our sense of purpose. We also lose our sense of place. And if everything is involved at a corporate level and not a local level, then nobody knows where their place is or what they're doing. And this goes back to the fundamental principles which established this country, which was the major divide, which I think we should reinitiate a debate upon. When this country was founded, you had 2 conflicting visions, and both of them were actually correct. But a lot of this history is also not taught. You have the Jeffersonian vision of America. And the Jeffersonian vision was that let's have America be primarily an agricultural-based country with small farms and the ability for people to own land, and also have cottage industries and give the people the ability to have their home cottage industries where they could make their living and practice their trades. But the problem was we needed a big, strong, standing army. So the Alexander Hamilton, the Hamiltonian vision of America was, well, let's model ourselves after London and have a stock exchange. Let's have a central bank. Let's have a currency that the government can use as a mechanism to print more and more fiat currency so that there could be a lot of money in circulation and a lot of movement of currency. I can see why we needed both at that time. But I believe Brigham Young and Joseph Smith before him, they were primarily Jeffersonians. They primarily believed that we should have small local communities based on agriculture, based on people with skills and trades, where a lot of trade in and among the locals was happening, and strong self-sufficient communities. And that's what really Brigham Young and the Mormon Church did all throughout the West, which is largely overlooked. So they did that in Kirtland, they did that in Nauvoo very successfully, and then of course they did that in Salt Lake City. But I'm going to jump ahead a bit and go to the gold rush, a part of history that is kind of hidden from most textbooks, is the gold rush in California. Sutter's Mill is where gold was discovered. But did you know that it was Mormon pioneers who actually discovered the gold and who built Sutter's Mill? Sutter's Mill, this is a recreation of what it looked like. If you're joining us on YouTube, it's very simple. But some of the very skilled carpenters and craftspeople happened to be in California at the time. Why were they in California? because they were called by Joseph Smith to go fight for the Mormon battalion in the Mexican-American War. And they fought for America to gain the territory, which is now the whole western part of the United States, in a battle against Mexico. And in 1848, all this land was ceded to the United States. And what's really interesting is just 9 days later, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill by James Brown and other Mormons. And then all of these prospectors and the mass migration, the biggest mass migration that's ever happened in the United States, happened in 1849. And the rest is history. But what is especially fascinating is when all this gold was discovered, and then later there was a silver rush in the Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons above the Salt Lake Valley and in Park City, Brigham Young was saying, we will not take part in these rushes. We will focus on our cottage industries. Instead of putting resources into mining gold and silver, Brigham Young built a woolen mill. He built a sugar mill and sugar house. He wanted to produce our own sugar, and so he figured out you could plant sugar beets and extract the sugar based on this technology that was available in France. And so they got a hold of one of these giant boilers. They brought it from France, dragged it across the Great Plains, and they started a sugar factory and sugar house. And he was more interested in that, and he was just ignored the whole gold rush. But don't get me wrong, the Mormons benefited greatly from the gold rush and the silver rush because they serviced all those miners who needed supplies, equipment, food, and that was how they were greatly benefited from that. But I want to describe for you how Mark Twain described the Salt Lake Valley early on. This was in 1872 when young Mark Twain visited the Salt Lake Valley and actually got a chance to meet with Brigham Young. But he describes the order and industry, and I find this description very interesting. We strolled about everywhere through the broad, straight, level streets and enjoyed the pleasant strangeness of a city of 15,000 inhabitants with no loafers perceptible in it, and no visible drunkards or noisy people, and a grand general air of neatness, repair, thrift, and comfort around and about over the whole. And everywhere there were workshops, factories, and all manner of industries, and intent faces and busy hands were to be seen wherever one looked. He goes on to say, Salt Lake City was a healthy, extremely healthy city. They declared there was only one physician in the place, and he was arrested every week regularly and held to answer under the Vagrant Act for having no visible means of support. So, I think that what they were building, the early Mormon pioneers, which they nailed, was that everybody has an essential role and a place, and everybody's trading locally with each other. That was the Western ideal. That's the Western character and ideal we need to preserve and protect in Utah, and that is where California has gone wrong. California appeals, their leadership has appealed to the elite and the super poor. California is not creating a small business friendly environment. They've been appealing to tech industries, but now they're having to tax the tech industries so heavily that the tech industries are leaving. And all of the big financial institutions, which are part of the Hamiltonian view of America, this giant moneyed interests have taken over California, and they will continue to take over more of the West if we don't get back to the Jeffersonian vision of America. I strongly believe that we need more local industry. We need to make more products here locally and in every community in the Great Basin, and we need to support local agriculture more than anything. And if we get back to those ideals, I believe Utah will remain strong and independent and our communities will remain strong and small business friendly. But if we allow the big, massive financial industries to take over, tyranny will also take over, because with big financial industry, you find crony capitalism, you find corruption, you find the government is far less for and about the people and far more about the rich and the elite. And we find we live much more in a plutocracy than a democracy. So that's my podcast. I thank you so much for watching. If you want to support this podcast, you can do it in one of 4 ways. First, you can just subscribe to this YouTube channel or give us a 5-star review on iTunes if you like this. Be sure if you subscribe on YouTube, you hit that bell notification icon so you find out about new episodes. Of course, give us a thumbs up too if you'd like. Second, you can go and subscribe to our free digital newsletter at utahstories.com. We have a free newsletter we send out just once a week. We don't spam you. We don't sell your information. If you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can do so. You just scroll down to the bottom of any story. If you do one of our Utah stories, then you scroll down to the bottom, and there you are. You can subscribe to our digital newsletter for free. If you want to subscribe to the magazine and have it sent to your home, where it's all about, we write all about the big picture things that are affecting the quality of life in Utah and the West, you can subscribe to the magazine through the website. And how you do that, I'm not sure, but I'll make it easier. And then you can also support our local advertisers who are in the magazine and tell them that you found them from Utah Stories. That's also very helpful. So thank you so much for watching, hanging out. Appreciate it. I'll see you next time.